But sanctions and economic pressure is not the only thing that is happening in Iran. We are seeing that Iran's also dying out. I mean, they're running out of water. The drought is obvious there, and that has been for years now. Is that really a concern in Iran? Are they dealing with it?
It's a significant concern. It's a concern to all of the citizens and residents of Iran. Imagine not having water in your faucets.
But that's a symptom.
It's a symptom of a situation in which the regime they have not maintained any sort of water infrastructure since the time of the revolution, and they're meeting it right now. And I would expect from a normal government is to make sure that the water infrastructure is sufficient for all of the citizens. And I'm aware of the fact that there's a drought and there's a specific issue with rainfall, but that's something that can be solved in the long term. But the long term for the regime is not the water or is not the welfare of the citizens of Iran, is to make sure that they maintain themselves financially so they can attack us at a certain point.
On the other hand, they are accusing Israel of being the problem.
Yes, of stealing clouds. I've also heard that. I think the notion behind it is that in many of the Middle Eastern countries from the UAE, if you head east, you essentially do what's called planting clouds to make sure that there is rainfall. To my knowledge, I don't think Israel is stealing clouds from the Iranians, and I also think it's some sort of blood libel. But again, the amount of blood libel coming from Iran against Israel is significant.
This is East to West. I'm your host, Balig Sladeen, and today we ask how come that Iran is still holding under heavy sanctions and how the economy actually works. And are the sanctions really fulfill their objective? To get answers for these questions, we talked to Ella Rosenberg, who is an expert on the Iranian economy and has extensive experience in analyzing financial systems and capital movements related to the Shiite axis. Her research deals with the transfer of funds from the Iranian regime and its proxies to European countries. Ella, thank you for joining us.
Hello.
We have a lot to talk about, many things that need to be clarified, because we're seeing Iran, since the revolution actually, since 1979, they're under sanction, and now there's a snapback as well, mechanism being activated, and they're still holding. How come that? I mean, in general terms, how comes that is actually happening?
Well, it depends what you consider holding, because you need to understand that the typical economy that we know of the West, in which you can order things of Amazon, you have an abundance of goods, you have an abundance of everything you essentially need, is something that is missing in Iran. They can't order things of Amazon. There's specific shortages in certain products within the economy itself. And it's not like having a typical day, then you can just walk into the supermarket and buy specific amount of things. And this actually relates to the amount of goods, but also the amount of capital. In addition to that, the exchange rate that's going insane within the past few years, specifically within the past few months. So it's not as if as you can say that they're working normally. For them, bad is normal. It's not our normal. Let me call it that way.
But the regime itself survives.
Yes.
How well?
They have what's called their own shadow economy. So you need to understand that for us in the West, we have our economy. We have a central bank. We have a Ministry of Finance. We have regulators. We have a specific economy per country. Then you have trade between these countries. Specifically for Iran, you have the state and then you have the regime. One of the ways that the regime is enabling to fulfill itself is within having a shadow banking system, which entails proxies that funnel money in and out of Iran. It also entails the sale of oil outside of Iran to other countries and also other types of goods such as gas and petrochemicals. And you have even other types of commodities that have not been as assessed up until now, such as human trafficking, as you can see within the latest State Department report within the past, I think, year or so. So it's not as if that the Iranian regime is making any sort of effort to maintain the Iranian citizens. They maintain themselves either within shadow banking, within funneling of money, and within sanctions.
But this is the whole thing. I mean, in the U.S., here in Israel, when we see that inflation is 1% more or 2% more, protests on the street, politicians step down, they vote them out if they don't step down. But that's absolutely not the case in Iran for a long time. And now we're talking about what, $1 equals 1 million or 1,200,000
a bit more.
Iranian rial. How come that they're still actually convincing, or I don't know how they deal with the anger that I assume there is anger from the...
There is anger. There's anger of the citizens. There's anger of the residents or the not citizens in Iran. But you need to bear in mind that I think the follow-up question that you're trying to ask is when the regime will fall. And once it will fall, I will assume there will be some sort of retaliance from the citizens. And then in that case, the economy will either go amazingly well or amazingly bad. But in order to foresee the fall of the Iranian regime is like foreseeing whether it's going to rain tomorrow or not. There is a chance it's going to happen tomorrow, but we're not sure. So I think the main question or the underlining tone that you're asking is when the regime will fall, because all the citizens are very angry. It's not something that you can predict. It's something that will be impacted by several things. It will be impacted by the citizens themselves and the way they see the regime and how they see their life within Iran. It's also impacted by outside factors, such as if there's going to be another round of war with Israel, because technically we haven't finished the war with Iran. We're only in the first round. And the same thing for the United States. If the United States will target again, it also depends on multiple other factors. So to say specifically that the citizens of Iran are not happy and why they're not demonstrating in the streets and making sure the regime will fall, it's a very complex question because, first of all, we're not living in Iran. We don't know how it is to live under a specific regime that's very tight and difficult, and one of the most enhanced regimes worldwide that has ever been. But I think if it's going to be a double solution in which we're going to have some sort of retaliation from the citizens themselves and some sort of outside pressure, it might happen at a certain degree.
Yeah, this pressure itself, I mean, I've read many of your articles. You're critical of the sanctions, or at least how they are being implied. Mm-hmm. Even the snapback mechanism that everybody thought that that's going to, finish Iran, but that's not working, as we see. So what does it take to actually make the sanctions work and be effective?
I always compare sanctions to school bullying, and I'll explain why. Imagine you have a classroom and you have a bully in the class, and the bully decides that you're not going to play with a certain child. So you won't play with that certain child because the bully sanctioned you not to play with him, and you're scared of its enforcement. You're scared that the bully will actually, beat you up or do something to you. Same thing with sanctions. When you have a bully, or when you have some sort of strong country, such as the United States, that decides that want to sanction a specific country, that's all well and done. But the other countries or the other market players that want to participate or need to participate in these specific decisions need to understand that there's enforcement. And up until now, the sanctions to a certain degree have not been enforced. You see it in many different levels. You see it with the oil trade from Iran to China. You see it with the shadow banking system. You see it with the funneling of money in and outside of Iran. So to say that there's no enforcement is, I want to say, let me even further it to an extent that if you have sanctions, you will need to have enforcement. But sanctions without enforcement, it's like having a bully that can't beat you up. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't help anything. So in order for the snapback regime or the one that's already been imposed will have to be enforced by the private sector. And the private sector only listens to certain other players, which are the regulators, and they need to make sure that these sanctions are imposed.
And is this sustainable long term? I mean, yes, since 1979, but also now more severe. And can they like for long term keep on doing the same thing?
Regulators are lazy. They don't like to work to an extent that they need to enforce things. They need to dish them out, the specific decisions. Same thing for a private sector. They're lazy. You look at the compliance officers at banks. They do have a license that they need to maintain, but at the same time, they also need to have things dished out for them. So the best way that the sanctions will be enforced, in my opinion, is to having some sort of task force that will combine both the sanctions and the enforcement. So on the one hand, it will create some sort of mechanism that will generate enough information to send towards the regulators, but on the other hand, also make sure that's enforced back. To that effect, it can't be a governmental task force, to have to be a citizens task force that was able to gather information either on OSINT level or other types of level and then transfer it forward, because the current situation will not withstand.
And in order for this to work, of course, Iran needs partners. You just mentioned China, but other players are here in the UAE, in Turkey, non-state actors, definitely armed groups. Who are they, and how does Iran interact with all of these groups? How does it actually happen on the ground?
I would divide it into two types of actors. I would divide it into the oil actors and into the banking actors. So within the oil actors, you see the main actors, China, in which you have Iran that has a specific amount of tankers, and they actually load these tankers, and then they take the oil into China. And to that extent, American sanctions do not work because it's within their eyes of the regulator. And physically, it's quite far from them. So for them to target, it's very difficult. The way they do it is that they load the tankers in Iran, and then the tankers, they ship into a specific area in the ocean. They do a specific type of transaction called ship-to-ship, or STS, in which the oil in the Iranian tanker is passed across to a different tanker and then it's sent into China. So that's one type of transactions. Another type of transactions you see within the shadow banking of Iran, in which certain actors within Iran, what they do, they funnel money into shell companies into the UAE and into Turkey. They have their own exchanges there within the companies themselves. And from there, they take it out into different places around the world, mainly Europe, funny enough.
Europe?
Yes.
How?
Well, you need to understand that if you want to work in Iran, or if you would like to, sell to the Iranian market, you can't work with them directly. You need to have a third person or a fourth person between you. And this is where the UAE and Turkey serve a very good purpose, because within the UAE, you have free zones within the specific, state cities. And within the free zones, those specific shell companies, they do the transactions themselves and they send it outside.
And we're talking about dual Iranian nationals in European countries, or we're talking just about anyone?
It depends.
Maybe
it can be anyone. Let me put it this way. For me, if I lived right now in the Netherlands and I wanted to sell some sort of tractor to Iran, it will be incredibly easy for me. Incredibly easy. I can take the tractor, I can put it on a specific ship, I can send it to the UAE, either Dubai or Abu Dhabi. I can create some sort of fake transaction there, either with a bill of lading and with a specific banking, and then ship it into Iran. People would be surprised how easy it is. And this is where actually the issue of enforcement comes to start to disturb you. This is where the issue of enforcement comes about. And you see it, and why did I give the Netherlands as an example? Because the Netherlands recently have launched it's called a hotline for sanctions. It's really funny. So if you're within the private sector and you're aware of a colleague or a business partner that's creating a situation that's against the sanctions, either against Russia or Iran, you can call that specific landline and tell them what's going on. This is what enforcement is, because the regulators themselves, they can't go company to company and check everything. It has to pop up organically.
So they're not serious, do you think?
No.
They're implementing.
Regulators in general, they have this facade that they're serious. They're really not serious. They have their own checklists that they have to follow. They have their own regulations that they have to follow. Some of them are quite on it, and they know exactly what they're doing. I'll give you an example. The Estonian FIU, one of the best FIUs worldwide, but they're very hands-on. You have other regulators that are not as such hands-on, so it depends.
Yes, and they're using, of course, the Iranians, what you call a shadow fleet. Mm-hmm. Recently, as you've mentioned in your article, they have reactivated the AIS
Yes,
system.
That was a surprise, wasn't it?
Why?
Well, there are numerous explanations for that. Bear in mind, I don't know the correct explanation. I think no one does. But essentially what happened is that the shadow fleet that's currently out in sea has not shared any sort of AIS, which is the sort of GPS signal that they send to the satellites above where they are in order for other countries that impose sanctions not to detect them. And this specific AIS transmission has not been in use for at least 5 or 6 years. Then all of a sudden, a few weeks ago, 80% of the vessels have released this AIS transmission out of nowhere for a few hours, and then it went down. And it created a bit of havoc because imagine that you're sitting, in one of the companies that detect these specific tankers, and all of a sudden you see them pop up and then fall down, which is quite... it's weird. It's very weird. It doesn't make any sense. My explanation to this is that they try to create a situation that the focus or the shift went towards that. Because once the focus or the shift goes towards the tankers, it means that the focus is not on something else. What can this something else be? Either transmission of certain goods into Iran or other sort of, maybe some sort of military, parades going on, not even parade, but some sort of exercises. And then if you look at around the same time that they put, the AIS up, all of a sudden certain nuclear materials go into Iran to specific entities, which is very interesting. So my explanation is that they try to create a diversion or some sort of, they try to create a diversion or facade that something's going on in sea while something else was going on in Iran, which is the transmission of the nuclear materials.
Yes, and Iran, after all, wants to find a solution for all of this, the Western sanctions and what the West is imposing on Iran. And I guess that at least what we are seeing is that they are trying to get closer to Russia, China, and the BRICS. Could that actually help Iran? Is this their way out of the pressure from the West?
I would divide my answers into 3 parts. So you need to understand that currently the Iranian regime is in a situation that it feels like a tiger locked in a cage. So it will do practically anything to maintain the current status, or at least enhance its current status, because it has nothing to lose. And this comes into the economy, because the only way practically today to make sure that the Iranian regime fall is either military intervention or economic warfare. And I think the best tool is economic warfare, because at the end of the day, if you starve the regime will not be able to do anything against you. And then it comes about to other actors worldwide that are also suffering from the West or are also having some sort of implications from the West, such as Russia and China. And then the issue of BRICS rises, because the way I see it, it's the group of children within the classroom that were outcasted. And then all of a sudden they form their own group. And this own group is their own economy. Now, what does this mean practically? We don't really know yet, because it has not been into practice yet. But I do see it as a threat. And once they have their own economy, and they do have their own economy, they have their shadow economy. But the fact that now it will be institutionalized is something completely different. Imagine it's like having a group of friends and then having some sort of some members club. It's a difference between having a group of friends or a members club, and this members club can also allow you transactions. It can allow you some sort of transmission of goods, transmission of oil. It's something completely different. So I would see it as a threat, yes.
But that's still far, you think?
Well, depends what you call far. So I don't think it will be fully...
they're on for the long run.
Yeah, they're on for the long, and this is also something that the West does not understand. We live in the West, and when we see something happen, we assume there's going to be an implication straight away. You need to understand that for the Iranian regime, and specifically within the Persian mentality, you can retaliate 30 years after a country did something to you. And you see it also between... the first war between Israel and Iran, and perhaps the second, because the Iranians keep saying, we're not done with this. We will retaliate. We do believe that you lost and we won, and we will prove it to you. Mm-hmm. So, again, the perception of time changes, and I think it's also a matter of culture. It's a matter of culture in which, in our culture, if you do something, you expect some sort of reaction straight away. But for them, it's not the case. You can do something today and you will see a result within 2 or 3 years, maybe 5 years.
Maybe a decade as well.
Yeah, maybe.
What you're calling for is actually what you said is financial deterrence doctrine. I'm reading it. How does that would work in practice?
How does that work in practice? Well, as I said, I think the best way to deter working with the regimes or specific countries that finance terror and make sure that their citizens live in ghastly conditions is to make sure that it's not economically viable to work with them. How do you do that? To impose sanctions. But even the imposition of sanctions does not work if you do not enforce them. So I'm coming back to my original point that you will need some sort of citizens task force that will take all the information, generate it into some sort of material that can be passed on to sanction-giving regulators. And then the feedback back to them will be from the private field or within the private sector, within a specific enforcement team that will see if the sanctions actually work. I'll give you a practical example. Imagine you're a compliance officer at the bank in Germany. You've never been to Iran. You don't have Iranian friends. You don't even know where Iran is on the map. But you see that you have a certain client that wants to onboard to the bank, meaning open an account for you. Once you see that he comes from Iran or he's under specific sanctions by regulators such as OFAC, such as OFSI, such as the European Council, a success for me will be the mere fact that his pen, that he's scared to sign off that specific bank account, because once he doesn't do that, it means that we succeeded. If he does do that, it means that the sanctions have no enforcement.
Yeah, that was a great example. But sanctions and economical pressure is not the only thing that is happening in Iran. We are seeing that Iran's also dying out. I mean, they're running out of water. The drought is obvious there, and that has been for years now. Is that really a concern in Iran? Are they dealing with it?
It's a significant concern. It's a concern to all of the citizens and residents of Iran. Imagine not having water in your faucets.
But that's a symptom.
It's a symptom of a situation in which the regime they have not maintained any sort of water infrastructure since the time of the revolution, and they're meeting it right now. And I would expect from a normal government is to make sure that the water infrastructure is sufficient for all of the citizens. And I'm aware of the fact that there's a drought and the specific issue with rainfall, but that's something that can be solved in the long term. But the long term for the regime is not the water or is not the welfare of the citizens of Iran, is to make sure that they maintain themselves financially so they can attack us at a certain point.
On the other hand, they are accusing Israel of being the problem.
Yes, of stealing clouds. I've also heard that. I think the notion behind it is that in many of the Middle Eastern countries from the UAE, if you head east, you essentially do what's called planting clouds to make sure that there is rainfall. To my knowledge, I don't think Israel is stealing clouds from the Iranians, and I also think it's some sort of blood libel. But again, the amount of blood libel coming from Iran against Israel is significant.
Would like you to elaborate on it. From what you're sensing, is there a debate even in Iran between reformists and hardliners about what we should do? I mean, the Soviet Union and other countries did fall, after all, after lots of pressure from the world, economical pressure specifically. Is that happening in Iran?
Well, it is happening in Iran. I'm glad you brought up the example of the Soviet Union, because many people think that the regime will fall such as it happened in the Soviet Union. People need to understand it's not going to be the same. But in the Soviet Union, you had many countries under a specific union. The political, financial, and cultural climate was completely different. Now, if you look at Iran, if you look at Iranian citizens, you have plenty of subcultures. You have Iranians, you have Azerbaijanis, you have Kurds, you have Afghans.
Baluch.
You have so many. And I know that there are certain tensions between certain groups, mainly between the younger generation, the older generation, the academics, the blue collar. There's a lot of tensions in between. But the one thing I can tell you is that if the regime will fall, It will happen only if it's going to be a combined solution of the country itself and the citizens themselves and some sort of outside interference. And the way I see it, the citizens themselves won't do anything unless they know they're backed up by the Western world.
Why? Because of what happened to them when they did
revolt? Imagine revolting in Iran. It's terrifying. It's really is terrifying. Yes, it's terrifying.
Exactly.
And we don't know. We live in a free world, in a free society. We have the privilege of walking outside without a headscarf. We have the privilege of going to places without gender segregation. We live in a world that's relatively free.
But would you say that everyday life in Iran is pretty normal, and that's why no one
it comes
dares
back to our original question: define normal. What is normal for us?
No, I mean, like, for someone, an Iranian that doesn't have the values that Westerners have.
And yes, it's still a difficult situation. Even the price of bread, we were discussing about it on a Saturday dinner with a few friends. Some of them are from Iran, and we looked up the price of a carton of milk, and we were flabbergasted. Even buying milk is considered a luxury today in Iran for the working class.
Right. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you
everybody asks these questions about how come that Iran is still holding, and what does it like to be an Iranian living under these sanctions. And I guess we have a lot to learn also from what you suggest as a financial deterrence doctrine. Thank you so much, Ella.
Thank you.